Hello, and welcome to our panel at Columbus NASFiC 2020. I'm Chris Barkley, and our panel here is Librarians, Collectors, and Booksellers, oh my. I'll be your co-moderator. My name is Chris Barkley. I'm currently a columnist for file770.com, and I'm also a professional bookseller of 25 years. Also, I've attended over 200 conventions, 29 Worldcons, and have been in fandom since 1976. Why don't we start off with introduction of our panel? Misha, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. I am Misha Stone, she, her. I am a reader services librarian in Seattle. I also was a bookseller both in Seattle and in Massachusetts. I serve on the Clarion West Writers Workshop Board, so I do a lot of work with the speculative fiction community. And I also teach genre courses and readers advisory courses adjunct at the University of Washington.
Next, Isabel.
Hi, I'm Isabel Schechter. My pronouns are she and her. I have been in fandom about just over 20 years, I would say. 10 of them I spent as a convention runner. I am in recovery from that. I was able to get out after 10 years. I have been to many, many conventions, most of them in the Midwest. I used to live in Chicago, and so that's my home base. I have been to many Worldcons as well, both in North America and globally. I'm here because I am on the board of the Friends of the Library in San Diego, where I now live, and I'm a book addict.
Okay, and Ms. Hoffman, I did not get a pronunciation for your name.
That's okay.
So go right ahead.
Thank you. It's Mayrav Hoffman. I am a archivist. I am not a librarian, but I inherited a very large Spanish collection. We are calling it the Harold M. Stein Memorial Filk Collection. I am a continuity editor. I am a collector. I am also a person who's worked in publishing for many years. I've been in fandom since the late 90s, and I am a con runner, God help me. And my mother's a librarian. My aunt is a bookseller. My sister's an agent. It's in my blood.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Locke. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a young adult librarian in Springdale, Arkansas. I have been a librarian for, I did the math, 13 years. And I have been reading sci-fi and fantasy ever since I picked up A Wrinkle in Time while waiting for my mother to get done with the shopping. And I also write and self-publish contemporary and paranormal romance.
Terrific. Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael R. Underwood, he, him pronouns. I'm an author, podcaster, and publishing person at large. I've got about a dozen novels out. My latest is Annihilation Aria, which is a found family space opera. And I've done urban fantasy to dimension hopping, science fiction, and martial arts epic fantasy. I was a bookseller at a Barnes & Noble for about a year. Then I was a commissioned sales rep for independent publishers. And then I was the North American sales and marketing manager for Angry Robot Books, a science fiction publishing house in the UK, for about 5.5 years. So I have had a lot of experience working with booksellers and some experience working in the library world from the getting books to libraries end rather than the being at libraries and getting books to readers end. And that's me.
Okay, anyone else on the panel? All righty then. I'd like to start out by asking each of our panelists, starting with Misha. What was the first sort of book experience you can remember having?
You did say you would throw us a curveball, Chris. Oh my God.
Baseball.
No, it's great. I grew up in Bremerton, Washington, in Kitsap County, and I went to the library every week. The letter I wrote to get into library school, which would not get accepted now because bookishness isn't necessarily the whole, basically sort of focus of librarianship anymore. It's changed dramatically. But you know, I talked about basically filling bags full of books, and I read everything. I read Wrinkle in Time. I read Anne Sexton Before I Was Ready. I read so many things that, and then the thing that was one of my personal claim to fame is my first boyfriend wrote my name in eraser on the windows of that library. And I knew that they didn't clean that window for years because my name was still there. I'll pass now to someone else.
Oh, just a moment. Hannah,
Yes.
are you with our panel?
Yes, I am with your panel. I am your chat wrangler. I am
Oh.
trying to find out who these extra people are.
Oh, okay. We'll just talk among ourselves then. Okay, Sarah, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think probably it's family legend that I started reading at 3, which I think is fake. But the first thing I think I can remember is when the public library got built in my small town when I was 8 or 9. And signing up for my first library card, getting to write my name in the little card in the pocket in the back. I basically lived there when I wasn't at home. And the librarians got tired of putting in all my hold requests, so they taught me how to do it myself.
Michael.
Yeah, I think probably my earliest definitional book experiences were when I was about 6 or 7, probably 7, and we just moved to Brooklyn from living in Texas. And my parents would let me go and take the recycling in to get the refund off of like aluminum cans and bottles and things. And then I would take that money and I would go and buy comics at my local comic shop. So I was reading like Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, X-Men, and some Spider-Man at the time. And then my dad started working in publishing, and his office was next door to the editor of the Choose Your Own Adventure series. So I tore through probably every single one of those that was published over the course of 3 or 4 years, and have never looked back.
Isabel.
So this will come as a surprise to no one who knows me. I was not the most well-behaved child. And where other parents would punish their kids by grounding them, taking away TV privileges, or, you couldn't go out to play or whatever that was. My mother realized that would not work for me because I didn't want to be outside. I would rather be inside reading. And so she knew where to hurt me. She took away my library card.
Ooh.
Oh. Yeah, child abuse, right? Child abuse. And so she thought, oh no, she thought that this was going to get me to behave, right? No. What it taught me is that at the time, you could take out a maximum of 21 books from the library. And there were a lot of places in our house that we could hide books. And so she would take my library card and I would just go to one of the hiding places and read the book at night after she had gone to bed. And so this continued for many years. Eventually she gave up, and I'm a book addict and I have so many books. I can't tell you which was the first. I think my interaction with the library is really what made a difference for me, not necessarily in a specific book. It was the ability to get whatever book I wanted and as many of them as I wanted all at once.
Yeah, speaking personally, the first books I remember reading, and this is back in the early 1960s, were Dr. Seuss books like The Cat in the Hat, or One Fish, Two Fish, things like that. My favorite memories back then were going to the neighborhood library, and I was fortunate enough to have a library about a mile or so away from where I lived. And I used to walk there, and I found out that it was one of the libraries that were built during the Depression. And it's a fine old building, and I get very nostalgic every time I drive by there. Beyond that, I identify what Michael said, because back in the 60s, pop bottles were worth a nickel. Beer bottles were worth more. We'll just say more. And I used to spend my money on comics, and I was privileged to be growing up at a time when the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Spider-Man, Justice League, the Flash, the beginnings of the Silver Age of comics. And from there, I progressed on to Ray Bradbury. Does anyone have a story about how they progressed from those early books to later books?
I didn't actually tell my early childhood one, so
I beg your pardon.
no, you're fine. I wanted to jump in and say this because it actually hooks off of yours.
Okay.
I was actually in a play of One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish as a child in Hebrew. So I can still recite portions of Dr. Seuss in Hebrew. I don't remember learning to read. I do remember my mother reading me Babar and thinking, oh, this must be in French. My mother must be translating it from French because it was in script. And since I couldn't read it, I assumed it couldn't be English. It had to be some other language. So clearly that funny looking script was French. And my mother, who knew French, was clearly translating it for my benefit. So that was one of my early, I really don't remember learning to read. I know I was reading by 3 or 4 because I remember reading to other people. And I still do that. I actually do a nightly bedtime story, which is on a private YouTube channel, so that other people can experience the vast library my mother accumulated for us as kids because she was a frustrated children's librarian.
So how did you transfer your love of reading over to something like middle grade books or young adult novels?
I would probably say it was Scholastic's fault. I got the next sheet from Scholastic and said, oh, these look good. And suddenly there were no pictures. And that was fine by me. You know, I was perfectly happy so long as there were still written words. I think I probably made the jump also through comics. I got hold of my cousin's comic books very young. And my parents brought home Sabra Man, which was an Israeli comic, which I don't think was intended for young readers, but, you know, because it involved things like nuclear explosions. However, I thought it was great and spent, I think, an entire day holed up in my grandparents' apartment reading it. So.
Isabel?
I think I might have to pass on this one because I can't think of a specific, I don't know. I don't have specifics. I think that my memories are so much more into like my feels about it, right? Like for me, it was more about the joy of being able to read and the joy of being able to be transported somewhere else. I didn't have the best childhood. We were very poor, and, you know, books were my way out. That was my ticket out. And so I didn't need a passport. I had a library card. You know, whatever I wanted, I could go there and I could get it, as opposed to the rest of my life, I couldn't get anything. And so for me, it's more about, I guess, more about the subject matter than the type of book. Initially, my reading was very much just, you know, kids stuff, you know, the Dr. Seuss stuff and, you know, that kind of thing. And at some point I transitioned to older books, but it wasn't any particular style. It was more about, this book is going to take me the hell away from here. And so that's really more of what I got from books, that they were able to give me a life that I didn't have.
Sarah?
I really actually relate to that very strongly because I'm not sure if the rest of y'all, especially the Americans, are familiar, but like I grew up in a Quiverful cult. So very, very conservative Christian, very restrictive. And like books were my way out and they were my rebellion, because my parents were very much of the, no, you can't read Harry Potter. No, you can't read anything with magic in it because that's how demons eat your soul. And so whenever I got caught reading those, my punishment was that I had to show my mother my stack of books at the library before I checked them out. Which there were also a lot of places in my house to hide books. And so Yeah, so it was just very, very much it was a way out. It was a bigger world with more points of view than what I was being told I believed and what I was being told that I thought. And so that I don't really remember when I went from reading Berenstain Bears to just starting at the beginning of the fiction section and going, read it, haven't read it, read it, haven't read it. But it was so much for me.
Michael?
Chris, I just remembered
Go ahead. Go ahead.
my gateway drug. You said Berenstain Bears, and it got me thinking of, how I transitioned from those books, like what were the next books. And I realized that it was very much in keeping with my desire to get out and to explore. It was the choose your own adventure books. Because there were possibilities there, and I got to choose how the story ended. And so that, I think, was what really made the difference between me going to get whatever kids' books were available, because they were books and they were stories and whatever, to being able to say, this is my book, this is my story. I wanted to end this way, not that way.
Michael?
Yeah, I think, it was a couple of years of comics and the Choose Your Own Adventures. And then I spent a number of years with books on tape as my bedtime stories. So I had Louis L'Amour books on tape, and then I had a ton of Star Wars Expanded Universe. So like New Jedi Academy through like Truce at Bakura and like that whole era of stuff, and just kind of taking them in passively, like as I went to sleep. So there's a bunch of those novels that I have strong memories of, very small parts and a very incomplete knowledge of the whole novel, because I'd be asleep by the end of side B of tape 2. And I think the thing that really got me kind of to become more like a super reader, or kind of fed my interest to the point of wanting to become a writer, was kind of getting into like tie-in and D&D books. So reading Dragonlance Chronicles, reading books from the Dark Sun setting, which is like a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting. And there was breadth there in the subgenre that let me kind of explore, but within some bounds that were already familiar, because I started playing D&D pretty early, like 4th, 5th grade. And so it was a lot of these kind of IP and tie-in types of books that were related to interests that I had, that tied into comics or to video games or to action figures. And then, I would spend enough of my time coming back to books that it became a core aspect of my fandom and my interest as a person.
Misha?
Like Sarah and Isabel, it was really an escape for me. I also grew up, with challenging family situation and dysfunction I didn't know how to name. And so books really helped me cope. They still do. They're my therapy. They're my medicine. They're just everything. So I think about the things that I started reading and what was sort of YA at the time. I read copious amounts of Lois Duncan, and I remember a book about kids and drugs called Ask Me If I Care by H.B. Gilmore. I also remember looking for the queer lit. I remember reading Patience and Sarah and trying to find things like that. And then someone had invoked, Marav, was it you that invoked Scholastic? I still remember getting Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard when that film came out through my Scholastic, and reading a book that was totally not for a 5th grader, but was just groundbreaking for me in terms of like what I ended up reading later. And I think it also launched me into Stephen King at that same time. I remember in fifth grade reading aloud some of the salacious bits on the bus. I think I think about hearing a lot of people say that they weren't allowed to leave the children's room in their libraries, and I never had that issue. I could just walk across and grab whatever. And so I definitely read some pretty intense adult stuff early, but also there wasn't as much YA at the time. So I feel like the terrain has changed so much.
Yeah, back in the 60s, my transitionary period was helped along by Scholastic books. They had a lot of juvenile series. The one that stuck with me the most, transitioning from comics, was the Danny Dunn series. I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of it. Danny Dunn, Invisible Boy, Danny Dunn and the Automatic House, which really got me interested in science and how things worked. And coming from a Catholic background back in the 60s, I had it relatively easy. And there was nothing better in the school day than seeing a list of scholastic books show up and get distributed, and you say, oh, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one. And from there, and the library, it really helped me as a burgeoning reader back then. Do you think these books, I'm speaking to the librarians here, what sort of books do you would you recommend easing kids, 10 to 12, to ease into nowadays? Because it's quite different than when I was growing up. Anyone?
I think I'm probably the main person who works with teens and younger children here. And honestly, like, there are a lot of really good stuff, really good middle grade and upper elementary chapter books. But like, I have found that like there are very few universals. The very few universals are usually pretty universal, but it's not 100%. For reluctant readers, the books with illustrations interspersed with the text are really helpful. Graphic novels, obviously, and it's great that a lot of popular series are getting graphic novel adaptations, because it lets those kids who maybe struggle with reading for various reasons, or who just don't like it as much, it gives them a quicker and easier entree into the series that their friends are talking about, and lets them be part of the conversation. But also things like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Dear Dumb Diary, Dork Diaries, the Dragon Breath series by Ursula Vernon and her Hamster Princess series as well. Those are all really good and really helpful if you can get past the adult insistence on giving them a real book.
Yeah, I found that at least when I was growing up, just getting your hands on the book you wanted was the most important piece of the puzzle. Does everybody agree on that, or were things recommended to you?
Sorry, I don't want to like talk all over everybody, but I actually, when I was in library school, I ended up tutoring a 19-year-old high school student who was in the special education program because his family had bounced around to different schools, and so he just kept falling further and further behind. And he was incredibly sullen, and he did not want to be involved in this tutoring. And then I asked him what he was interested in, and he said he was interested in hunting and he was interested in aliens. And so I went to the library and I got books about hunting and I got books about aliens, and it was like night and day, completely different. His teacher said that he even volunteered to read in class.
Whoa, that's a brave move, because I was petrified as a child speaking in front of a class. Anyone else?
I think there was a very brief period between like 3rd and 5th grade where I had a book buddy, where like there was somebody else in my school who actually read the same kinds of stuff that I did, and we passed back and forth the Oz books and, you know, just certain things that we had come up with. Comics, we were both really into Archie comics at that point, so being able to trade issues with someone else was a really big deal. And then she moved away and I went back to being a solo reader, so it was a very brief window into what it was like to have a book club, or to have someone else recommending books to you. Like, to have access to someone else's library was like, oh, hey, this is great. Now I have twice as many books. So.
Anyone else?
I feel like I had a pretty great combination of self-directed exploration and getting recommendations, because my dad worked in publishing, and so a lot of his colleagues were like, oh, your son would like this, try this, and sending books home with them. But then I was also finding comics and things on my own. And like once I got into the kind of the tie-in world, I would be a little bit more self-directed, like, okay, I'm interested in this world more than that one. And a lot of my communities were not as much reading focused as like genre more generally, like playing D&D, playing Magic the Gathering, video games, and books would kind of orbit some of those interests, were never as central. So it was kind of a mishmash of a bunch of things.
I'd like to ask the other panelists whether or not board games actually entered into your formative years and how it connected with your reading.
We were a heavy board gaming family because we were Sabbath observant. And the two things that we did on the Sabbath were we would read and we would play board games. So sometimes if we were playing a very slow board game, one of us would have a book and be looking at it. We would look back. We'd played this board game a million times. Okay, it's your move. Assess the board, take your move, go back to your book for 5 minutes while the other two people go. So yeah, there was some connection, but it wasn't like this board game franchise has tie-in novels. We didn't even know what tie-in novels were until I think probably high school.
Yeah, I feel a connection there because I had cousins who lived up the road. I live in Cincinnati, and my cousins lived 50 miles up the road in Dayton. And besides exchanging books and comics with them, we would play what we called Super Monopoly. In other words, if you got, oh, sure, you've got Boardwalk and Park Place, and you're only supposed to book one hotel on them. Oh, no, 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 no. We have 5 hotels on them. You land on there, you're done. That sort of thing. I love that. Anyway, moving on. Is anyone else besides Sarah a librarian? Okay. Well, I take it you still work in a Seattle library. You like to tell us what are those kids reading nowadays?
So one of the reasons I let Sarah answer that question is she's a teen librarian. Because I serve adults more. I definitely help teens, but I feel overwhelmed enough to read so much of the breadth of what is coming out for adult readers that I don't always have my finger on the pulse, and that's why I often defer to the youth librarians I'm helping. I would say exactly what Sarah said, which is just a lot more graphic novels. I'm thinking about my kids, and I have a 13-year-old and an almost 11-year-old, and board games, graphic novels, comics, Magic the Gathering, all those things are really creating the worlds that they are interested in. And I feel like the richness in terms of speculative fiction now for young readers is really exploding. I think that Rick Riordan, the Rick Riordan Presents, Amulet, Hilo, there's all kinds of stuff. Also, Jason Reynolds, Angie Thomas, The Hate You Give, when you get into the more YA stuff, there's just so much better representation, so many possibilities for young readers that weren't there before.
Mm-hmm. And the parents, what are they reading?
So one thing that Sarah said that I just wanted to point to is that often you do have to struggle, maybe not from, the quiver cult perspective, but just, adults often try to suppress what they want their kid to read in terms of saying that comics are not real reading or they need to be reading the classics. And so I do what I can to kind of break down some of that bias and try to say that you should be serving, just like Sarah did, the person she was working with, the youth she was working with, find their interests and actually help them read the things they're interested in, because they will not love reading if you're trying to force them into things they don't enjoy. Adult readers, they're complex. Many of them love what they love. When I, became a librarian, I became a librarian because I didn't have a lot of great librarians growing up recommending things to me. So I do everything I can to not be a person that someone is intimidated to talk to. But also I had to acknowledge the fact that that can be the case. People are scared to go ask for help. What can you do to be welcoming? And yeah, I do a lot of work in terms of making sure that I know who's writing urban fiction, who's writing romance, who's writing paranormal, who's writing science fiction, so that when someone walks up, I have both curiosity and knowledge that I can help them and empower them. And that I'm also enthusiastic about what they love. I may not know and love everything, but I try to do everything I can to essentially validate them as a reader and help them find the next book that they might love.
Hmm. So next question I have is, anyone who collects books, please raise their hand. All right. Do you
So
know?
we
Go ahead.
talked about this earlier about in terms of, we're book people. We all collect books.
Yeah.
The question is, are we, a collector? Like, are we doing, first editions and that kind of thing? Is it the format or is it the content? And so I collect content. I don't care what edition it is, or is it the one with the red cover or with the picture of the dragon? Like, I don't care. I just want to read the book. And so yeah, I collect books, but that's a byproduct. Like that's the symptom of my addiction. That's not the addiction itself.
Well, I have to confess, I can remember the first book I actually collected. It was first edition of Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man, which happened to be in a small bookstore right across the street from the main library downtown in Cincinnati. I paid the princely sum of $5 for it. And I treasured that book for a long time before I eventually had to sell it when I was in college. But I have to admit, for a long time, yeah, I had to have first edition, first printing of any new book. And I find nowadays it's very detrimental to someone who tries to do that and has 1,200 square feet of space to work with in their home, and they have a partner who says, all right, now every book you buy, you have to, 2 books have to leave if you continue doing this. So
My partner calls me a book hoarder. It makes her very nervous.
It doesn't count as hoarding if it's books.
If you sit on them and you growl and breathe fire, it does.
No.
Still working on that part.
Anybody have a first book that they actually bought and loved? I'm not counting My Demolished Man as a book I first got and loved. That's something else.
I was really lucky in that my mother, as I said, was a frustrated children's librarian. So not only did I have the library, there was a focused children's book store in my city, and we would go there. It started out on like a 3rd floor of an apartment building, and eventually they had like a storefront, and they had a bathtub that you could lie in and read books. And this is a funny story, but I used to do that, and the bathtub actually followed me to a school where I was having a miserable time. They got rid of the bathtub when they moved the store, and I thought, oh no, I'll never see my bathtub again. And I got to this new miserable school where everybody hated me, and I walked into the library and there was my bathtub. And I climbed into it and I read The Westingame for the first time, and that was my book. Like that was the one that I stole it from the library. I'm not proud, but I still have that copy. And it changed my life. It's still my favorite book. And I think it was probably the connection with the bathtub, but also it's about an alienated teenager and fitting into society, and how does that work, and how do human relationships work. And for me, as an alienated 13-year-old, that was the perfect moment. So that's mine.
Anyone
Mine
else?
has to be an illustrated Dark Crystal book. And I remember having it in 2nd grade, and I wrote to the illustrator in England, and I still have the letter that I got back from him in which he flattered me by having, you must have watched that movie more than anyone else at that particular time. I was one of those nerds that wrote to people and wrote to random, like I wrote to a seal at an aquarium in New London, Connecticut. Anyway, so
Haven't we all?
right. So strange, but why not? Yeah, so the Dark Crystal, I read that thing over and over and over again. And I was in Catholic school and we weren't supposed to trade stickers. And I would trade stickers inside that book during reading time. It was like stealth. Multi-purpose book.
Michael?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that, like, actually, I think it is on these shelves behind me. It wasn't one that I bought for myself, but the first Christmas after I went to college, which was like my first time being out on my own, a friend gave me used copies of The Black Griffin and The White Griffin by Mercedes Lackey because he thought that I would like them. He was right. They're still on my shelf. And that was like my kind of wake up call that like my consumption of books especially was under my control, that I had agency over that.
Well, Michael, you were going to say?
Yeah, I think the bit that stands out to me is like in the early and mid 90s, it was a relative maximum of like holographic and lenticular covers. And like special edition collector's covers, and oh, the death of Superman, it comes in a bag, and we printed so many that it won't actually become more valuable.
Not a body bag, not a body bag for Superman, no.
Like the speculation market. And I wasn't into that because I was like 10. But I thought that like the holograms and like the other things were like, you know, really cool covers. And I remember that there was a cover of an X-Men book where like Magneto was doing something very body horror-y to Wolverine. And I think those were maybe the first books where the quality of the codex itself, even if it was like a floppy, like actually struck me, as opposed to book is vessel for content to put into my brain. And those still stand out. I did a terrible job of keeping them in good shape. So I have a stack of like 90s era X-Men comics that are all missing their cover and possibly 1 or 2 pages that are sitting in a box. So like they're worth nothing to any collector, but I am excited to go back and read through them, even though I could just jump on Marvel Unlimited and reread them. So that's kind of that first memory that's more like collecting to me.
Isabel, you want to jump in? Isabel? Oh, unmute. Oh, there you go.
I'm still in my feels, so I'm going to pass.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that the first book I really treasured, I got when I was about, I think 13 or 14. It was the then brand new double edition of the Hugo Winners volumes 1 and 2. And I'm not, let's just say that the stories in the books that stretch from 1955 all the way up to about 1970 were mind-blowing for me, because I'd never experienced anything like those. And there's a big argument today over whether older science fiction is, or canon science fiction is actually healthy or good. I'm of two ways. If you don't need it, you don't need it. However, I'm of the opinion that in order to know where you're going, it's good to look back and see where other people have been. Anyone have any opinions about that?
I mean, I grew up reading classic science fiction, including Heinlein, including all the Ben Bova, editions of everything. And it doesn't seem to have done me a lot of harm. I probably did have to unlearn some ideas eventually, but I had people around me for that. And by the time I found fandom, I had mostly unlearned it. So I think it's good to have a diverse ability to read. Like, it's good to be able to pick up anything and read it. Your mind does the filtering for you sometimes. Like, it'll tell you whether you feel good about an idea. Sometimes you feel good about an idea that other people will have to disabuse you of later, but that's what friends are for. And hopefully you have friends who are co-reading or who are talking to you about books.
I just want to let everybody know there's about 10 minutes left in the panel. So anyone else want to jump on this?
So this one I do want to jump on.
Okay.
There's been a lot right now, like you were saying about what the canon is and how the canon is evolving. And I definitely, there are some old, for lack of a better word, these old white guy kind of books that it's just like, can we just like kill those books and be done? Like, they just need to die and we need to move on, because there's a lot of really good stuff out there that we need to be reading. But there are some books where it's like, when I have people come in, to the book sale. I volunteer at a book sale, and people will come in and say, you know, I'm interested in a book about, you know, unicorns, or I'm interested in rockets. I'm interested in, you know, whatever it is. And I'll ask them what they've read or what they haven't read. And if they haven't ever read anything, I will always recommend, you know, one of the classics, one of the greats, you know, one of the golden ages or whatever. You know, if they want to talk about robots, like I have to tell them about Asimov. Like that would be wrong. I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't tell them about an author who has been foundational in what robots have been interpreted as being. I would tell them to read RUR. I would tell them to watch Metropolis, right? But then I would also have them read all sorts of new books that really examine what it is that we have, what we have transformed robots into androids, into, you know, synthetic humans or whatever. You know, there's an evolution there. And so there are some works that are just so foundational, you know. Oh my God, my brain. Fahrenheit
451.
Thank you, my brain. So Fahrenheit 451, like, how do you not tell someone about this book, right? But then how do you not tell somebody about Ursula Le Guin, right? Octavia Butler, like like that would just be wrong. If you didn't tell somebody about Le Guin and Butler, like you just need to go home and stop lying that you're a book person, because you clearly are not, right? And so it's this really difficult balancing act of, you know, how do you distinguish between like the pulpy stuff that, you know, for its day might have been interesting, but at this point we have so moved beyond that. Like, don't waste your time with that. There's certain things you need to read, and there are others that you can just skip that whole chapter.
Did anyone here watch the latest rendition of Perry Mason on HBO? I just want to tell you, it was quite a revelation for me, because I liked the new version. I happen to own a collection of the old shows. But if you go back and read the very first Perry Mason novel from 1933, The Case of the Velvet Claws, it is horrible. It is not very well written. However, the saving grace of Earl Stanley Gardner was that he could plot like anything. Never mind characterization or anything like that. He could plot. And I think that plugs into what Isabel says, that there are some things you don't need, and there are some essential things that you do need. Does that kind of wrap it up in a nutshell for you? Okay.
I think so. I think it's important to know where we've been versus so that we know where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think about, like, I think there can be a contrast between something that is foundational within the history of the genre and something that's a good on-ramp at the time for the person. And sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of what was said, it's absolutely true that you're balancing with what that reader is telling you about what they enjoy, with also trying to make sure that you are encouraging an understanding and awareness of the queer, trans, people of color writers that need to be read. You know, because one of the things that happens is that the things that became canon, there's so many other things that didn't get published then, or that didn't get the notoriety then. And so what can we do to continue to uplift those voices now? We can give them the foundational text in a particular genre, given what they want to read, but I think we also need to be doing everything we can to promote the new voices. There's a question from an audience about how librarians reconcile reading with keeping some backlist for avid readers. And I'll just tell you, it's really, really hard because every public library is a living, breathing organism. The sales that Isabel are at are often the things that are deacquisitioned. Connie Willis read parts of a short story, a novella that came out of hers called Traveler in an Antique Land. And it's a beautiful story. And it's about basically like a land or a bookstore, the last copies of each book and why they become the last copies. And I sat there listening to her thinking, I am a book executioner. Like, one of the things that's so hard about being a librarian and being in this, and even in the book world where you have to get rid of the mass markets and pull the covers off, right? You often are, you have a lot of power. And so we try to balance what patrons are looking for with, you know, making sure we have the Earl Stanley Gardner, making sure that we've got the Asimov, making sure that we've got a breadth of things, because we cannot assume that people are only reading the bestsellers. We want to make sure that we have breadth and depth and backlist, but we have to make painful choices. I'll let Sarah speak.
Yeah, one of the things that I've had to do is create a core collection list, because I do have a very small space for my teen collection. I do have to weed very aggressively at times to make sure that people can actually find things. But there are some things that are important. Like, for example, Sharon Draper is on my core
Cincinnati.
collection.
Listen, Cincinnati.
She's on my core collection list because our population doesn't check out her books with the frequency that they do others, but I want those to be there for the kids who want them and who need them. So sometimes it means a judgment call.
All right, we only have a couple of minutes left. Does anyone else have anything to add very briefly before we all go out and party virtually?
I wanted to say in response to Misha and Sarah that you're not an executioner, you're a curator. And I used to manage a science fiction library where our space had been taken away. And we had hundreds of thousands of books, some of which were signed, in storage. And we had to pull out the ones that were going to go onto literally 3 bookcases. And so we literally were going through and pulling out frontlist things and classics and intermingling them in an attempt to try to create a representational science fiction library for all of this. It took us dozens of weekends, and we just would rotate them through as much as we could to try to bring as much of the parade of science fiction in front of our readers as we could, because our readers were people who were attending college and probably were being exposed to science fiction for the first time. And it was a very harrowing process. So kudos to you guys.
One of the things that that I want to remind people is, like, we've all talked about people who have influenced us or who have provided resources for us, given us suggestions. I just want to remind you that, Amazon doesn't do that, right? Amazon has reviews, but how do you know if you trust that person, right? Even Goodreads, right? Like, you may know those people, but they may not know you personally. And so when people come into the book sale and they say to me, I need a book about robots, or whatever it is, if I've gotten to know that person and they are not an Asimov kind of person, I'll say, let me get you a different book, right? But that's because I know them. That's because they come to the book sale every month. That's because I know everything else that I've sold them, right? And so I know, or like the kids, I know what books the parents are going to say no. And as much as it kills me to not give certain books to kids, it would kill me more to have that parent not bring the kid back, right? But you need to remember, Amazon isn't going to do that for you. Online booksellers aren't going to do that for you. Now, I shop at Amazon, I'm not going to lie, right? But you also have to remember to support these small bookstores and the library and all these other places, not just for their sake, but for yours as well, because you need to know what it is that you don't know, right? And so you need those librarians to tell you, hey, here's something for you.
And library staff, booksellers, we love to help make personalized recommendations, suggestions. We have a service in Seattle called Your Next 5 Books. Secret, you don't have to have a library card. You can still use this everywhere. Don't deluge us, but I'm just going to say.
Okay.
But you can also make use of, there are so many librarians right now during COVID times at home waiting to be able to help you in whatever way they can. Booksellers too, we do need to support and understand that we're here to help you.
Okay. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it right there because we're out of time. I'd like to thank all of my panelists for being here this evening, and I hope everyone who is either watching or listening and enjoyed it as well. Listen, thank you very much, guys. Let's do it again.
Thank you,
sometime.
Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to our moderator and to our tech crew.
Yes, and the tech crew. Absolutely. Take care.